the call for Jamaica to be a digital nation isn't a new conversation. So I know that there must be some joy. You're feeling some joy now looking at where we are at right now. And we've made big moves. So we have the e-gate, Nick, remember? We're gonna Nick, yes, yes, yes. Nick being issued, the AI task force, and so much is happening. But the reality is Jamaica, Jamaica, Jamaica. Culturally, there are a few things that I can say we interpret things in an odd way. So, Needs, for example, had a strange cultural response. We might have connected it to the end times and God coming, whether or not it was the chip, as some of us may have heard. But the reality is, we need for our people to trust the product. How can we trust the product? That's the question to be answered. And that will be done now through our next guest speaker. Do you know who is coming to speak at this time? And who is that? Matthew, that is correct. So while Matthew comes, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him. So he is a seasoned leader, an advisor, a visionary with extensive expertise in digital transformation and software development. Matthew leads co-develops civil society engagement as the director of inclusion, safety and civil society engagement in shaping digital public infrastructure initiatives in partner countries. Before co-develop, Mr. McNaughton worked at UNICEF rather as a global technology for development specialist, overseeing a digital messaging ecosystem that delivered more than 490 million messages each year, connecting children, mothers, and caregivers with life saving information and public services. Whether it was the World Bank, where he served as the Open Innovation Specialist, or as a principal of Slash Roots Foundation, or any of his many capacities. Matthew works at the intersection of digital citizen engagement and design to improve services and develop outstanding results within the social impact sectors across various developing country contexts and scales.
Right. So I'm gonna cut my presentation a little bit short, at least to be able to allow us to move to lunch. But I'll actually start because one of our professors I had that said something that I've adopted is that good questions are always answered on the next slide. And so we ended the last presentation talking about this question of trust, and we're going to spend the time talking about trust. So I'm gonna do two things very quickly. One, give us a sense of where are things in the Caribbean. I think we're going to be getting some keynotes, some country spotlights from the region, and then going to talk about this issue of trust, which connects to adoption, and move quickly. I'm glad we were able to ask some questions just now. I'm going to have some questions for you all as we are moving through quickly, and then we'll take it from there. Does this work? So I'm going to actually, part of what I'm going to be presenting today comes from a project. Dan used it this morning, the DPI map project, which is an initiative to actually map the state of digital public infrastructure across the entire world. It's really the first initiative trying to do that. It's a project led by David Eves at the University College of London's Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. And in jumping to that, I want to actually start with a couple of questions. So I don't think we have a roving mic, but the question has been up here long enough, and it's to you all. What is your sense of how many digital ID initiatives exist in the world? 80? It's fine, it's fine. 80. Oh, okay, so we have 80 and 150. All right. We're going to do the same for payments. How many instant payment systems do you think exist globally? 60? 400. Okay. I don't know if that's the hunger or the. Oh, I mean, I suppose there are ones that are failing. No, these are not failing ones. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Okay. Okay. 20. All right. Couple another 60 answer. And then lastly, and we've heard some stuff about Jamaica's data exchange. How many data exchanges do we think are operating globally. Digital public in 1030. Okay. I think every time we do this question, because we've now launched this project, it's fascinating how much, even amongst people working on this topic, how much we don't know about what's going on globally in this space. And so I don't have any prizes to give out, but I do want to give a sense and step through this because I think when you see the numbers, the immediate question that comes out of this is, well, how are you measuring? Which is, I think, is a very valid question. We're not going to have time to go into all of those today, but I'll talk to a couple of attributes of how the team has, in doing this project, looking at 210 10 countries, which is not just national states, but also territories and others, able to kind of come with this number. So there are a couple of things that they're looking at across the projects. One, the projects have to be active and in operation, generally speaking. Two, and this will vary a little bit across each of the systems. So in the case of ID, you have to facilitate digital authentication. In payments, we're looking at payments that are real-time transactions, which is critical for digital payments, right? So not just if I'm buying a good from you, I can't wait till tomorrow to know that the good that I'm giving you, you've received my money. So we're talking about instant payment systems. And in the case of data exchanges, we're looking at exchanges that operate across sectors. So not just an exchange that's happening, in health or in agriculture, but are we talking about platforms that facilitate things in multiple sectors? And so there's the kind of that use case test. And then in all of these cases, we're actually, their key part of this is that there needs to be a public interest governance as a key component of whether something is public infrastructure. Now, you can have private infrastructure, and that's fine. But the question is, we're looking at how do we facilitate this for participating not just in the state, but broadly as well. And so we're going to dive into a little bit of that, and I'm going to share a few things. But I think one of the things that's key to look here, and I know we've talked about this idea of DPI as a topic, but this approach, I think one of the key things is that this is not a fringe idea. There are countries across the entire world that are working on taking this infrastructural approach to their digital transformation journeys, not just building things in silos, but saying, when I build my data exchange, how do I build that for the entire society? When I create a payment system, how do I build that for the entire society? Because what we've done from a siloed perspective isn't giving us the social dividends that we need. And so we have to figure out how do we solve that problem, and the state is uniquely positioned to be able to support that. So, well, it's a research project. There are a number of things. I think the key things from this slide, they're primarily using desk research methods to be able to find out and in where projects are, focusing initially on ID payments and exchanges. And in many cases, they're validating what they found with interviews, either with development partners, regional entities, or the implementing agencies themselves. So let's talk about the Caribbean. So we looked at, in the Caribbean, the team looked at 19 projects. In the case of ID, there are 11 of those systems claim to be digital or electronic IDs. 10 of them are in the planned, piloted, active phase of what's at work is going on. 6 of them, digital protection laws in place. And actually only one of, going from the 19, only one of them have operational digital authentication in play. Can anybody guess who the one is? Does NIDS have operational digital ID authentication? Not yet. Not yet. Dominican Republic, the DR. And their keynote is later today. So, I mean, that's going to be quite an interesting one. But when we talk, and then we talk about this idea of, we talked about speed, we talk about implementation. I think what we found, even looking at the Caribbean, is that, once you go, there are lots of, we've been talking about the idea of doing digital ID and digital projects for some time. But getting to the place where we actually have the things in place that actually facilitate the kind of participation, um, positionless participation, where I can sit at home and authenticate for service, My grandmother can say, I am alive, I can participate my pension. That's where we need to get to be able to start to facilitate that. And we have a lot of work still to do across the region on ID. Payments, a little bit more here going on. 19 countries, again, a couple as 11 in various ways facilitates real-time transactions, 7 active, and the governance component, 5 of them in this case for payments are has a central bank as the operator facilitating some of those things. And all of the data is publicly available and downloadable at dpimap.org as well. Last one, data exchange. Um, Similar, going through the part, we have a lot of projects where countries are claiming to have this work in flow. Lots of things in pilot, maybe implementation. Only 5 that feel like they're cross-sectoral in terms of facilitating participation. And when we got down to the end, there was really only one that facilitated more than one sector. Um, Thoughts on who this was as well? Um, Damerp again. Um, but I think there are several countries, and we'll hear from Trinidad. I know Inshan is going to be talking today, that are very close to that level. We obviously have the JDXP, we heard that. So we have projects that are in flow, but there's work to be done to get to that level where we have the integration, we have that facility, and we can move forward as well. So, make we talk about trust. Um, this is for us in the region the big elephant that we need to solve. And I see a lot of heads waving, nodding back at me. And this is something that we have to work through, and we have to put this at the core of the work that we're doing moving forward. I'm preaching to the choir. I think we all agree digital provides us with an opportunity. I would go as far as to say that I think we have an opportunity that maybe for the first time in the region, we can create institutions that can meet the needs of every single person in our communities. But we're not just going to get there by building technology and deploying technology. And in fact, and I think this is something that is very much core of the work that we've been doing, that we can't force it. Digital transformation moves at the speed of trust. If people don't trust the systems, if they don't trust the institutions, if they don't trust the processes, if they have not been engaged in effectively in the systems that we're creating, they're not going to participate in that. And in many cases, what we're actually going to run into is contest. And that's contest is what we've seen in a lot of different parts of the world. And I think what's been interesting, particularly as it relates to DPI, is that many governments are really struggling to build trust and to lead effective multi-stakeholder processes that can ultimately bring the society into place. And when you do that really badly, you end up in the worst case scenarios, you end up contests that actually go all the way to the highest points in the land. So there are many countries where, and I kind of look at this as a synopsis of like maximal challenges to the system, which means that things that were challenged at the Supreme Court within a particular country. Unfortunately, this is not one of the things that I would like Jamaica to be known for, but it has happened here. It has happened in many other places where, because of various issues, either persons bringing cases because we have systematically excluded specific communities, or because there have been poor engagement with the public and there are referendums that have been rejected. We have to do better. And we cannot ignore the fact that if people are not bought in, if they're not engaged effectively, if we move more quickly than where the community is, or we try to force them, because this is one of the things that government often feels, is that as government, we can mandate. We'll run headfirst into this issue, and people have pushback. This is just the cases that have gone through. There are several that are still pending, like in Uganda, and so we have to think very intentionally about the trust issue. And trust doesn't just affect challenges. And I know I have a couple of friends here from from Barbados, trust also slows down your ability to implement. And so we've seen in Barbados, there's I think you guys are now at maybe like 90% of enrollment in the Trident card, but we haven't been able to turn on the digital authentication component of that because people don't feel comfortable with the system. And so, even when you're making progress, you're doing things on one level, you can run into barriers elsewhere if people feel that, for whatever reason, whether it is misinformation, disinformation, or quite frankly, they've just been excluded from participating. We have to think intentionally because without trust, adoption is not possible. Okay, so I'm going to close. My brother from Kenya just stepped out a while ago, but I want to talk about M-Pesa as a last 2 minutes because I think it's particularly relevant to the Caribbean and where I think we need to go and what we'll be talking about over the next couple of days. Momo, as we talked about this morning. So, if you're not familiar with M-Pesa, Robert, yes, probably the most popular, most successful mobile money system in the world. 20 billion transactions in 2023. 59% of Kenya's GDP goes through M-Pesa. The Kenyan government owns 35% of Safaricom, which is the company that runs M-Pesa. I have a question for the room. Is M-Pesa DPI? I'll speak loudly because if we had the level of adoption that Kenya has had with M-Pesa at the regional level or in each of the countries that we have, the kind of social dividend that we would have been able to unlock is massive. Now, I would, and Robert and I have argued about this on many occasions. I think one could make the case, and within the context of the DPI map and the work that it does, is that you wouldn't call Kenya technically DPI because Kenya is actually just a dominant platform of a private entity. And in fact, until quite recently, there was not broad interoperability on top of M-Pesa. So if you were maybe if you there was some limited interoperability with the bank with some of the banks, but as an entrepreneur, you couldn't just go and build on top of M-Pesa. And so some of the kind of mashup that we want to be able to facilitate, and we think that is alpha that is on the table, that any entrepreneur, any person that wants to be able to build a business can leverage this infrastructure for what they want to do, rather than just having, Google Pay or some other specific wallet being a platform that has been dominant. That there's a different way and more value that you can unlock thinking about those things as well. Interestingly, earlier, 2 months ago, they in Kenya, they launched PesaLink, which is adding a much stronger interoperability layer to their mobile money ecosystem. And now you can move payments not just within the M-Pesa ecosystem to any other mobile wallet provider, to other banks, etc., and vice versa. And so it's going to be quite interesting to see how this continues to evolve, even in a place where mobile money has become very sophisticated in its adoption. They felt that it was needed to not just have a single point of failure, but to facilitate competition in the markets, to be able to facilitate integration, that this was a thing that was needed. The last two things I'll say about this is that PesaLink is run by the Kenya's Bankers Association. So this was a private sector collaboration to ultimately unlock and enable this kind of interoperability. And so you're still actually missing that public interest governance component from this particular project. But this is a journey that Kenya has chosen and is on for themselves. And so over the next 2 days, as we think about what is the journey that we want to take as a Caribbean, I think I wanted to end here because we have assets here in the region that we can leverage as we think about what is the DPI that we want to build, what is the kind of ways that we want to move forward. And in Jamaica, and I think multiple people have spoken to it, we have had a graveyard of mobile money efforts. There are several people in this room that have been connected to. And I mean, I suppose Jamdex is not in the graveyard, Anika. I think that's fair. But Jamdex has an adoption level of less than 1% at this stage. So let's put it to not broadly adopted. So there's a lot of money that has been spent here as we think about this for ourselves. But I think what's interesting and kind of going back to the Kenya case is we also have a thing here in Jamaica called Multilink. And so when we think about what the path for us could be here in Jamaica, in thinking about how do we ultimately unlock those other aspects of DPI that we think we don't currently have but could enable us to move forward, I think we can think in different ways about how we get there rather than we just necessarily have to create new things as well. So with that, I am going to wrap. This will be the last time I think I'm speaking to you guys for the next 2 days, but I will be around. And thank you very much. Yeah. I don't know if we have any time for questions. I don't know where we. Sure. I see there are two hands. One here. You had a question, and then Dr. Mansing. And any other questions in the room? Okay. All right.
So much. My question is more in terms of you indicating that the faster payment has to be by the central bank. Uh, that's not the trend we see everywhere because the central banks are moving away from running retail payment systems, and faster payment systems are considered retail payment system, right? If you look at the same definition, India's UPI is not run by the central bank; it is run by a bankers association or owned by the banks. So would you not call it a public infrastructure? You would. So I think somewhere you have to change the definition there, I think. Thank you.
I mean, okay, so there are a couple of things there. So when the team was doing the project, they made some normative definitional points, and they're happy to take pushback around how you ultimately wrestle with some of those things. And I think they've gotten a lot of engagement or pushback on that. That some of the definitions, and I think in subsequent versions, there's going to be work there. I mean, but in India, I mean, the Royal Bank is playing a very active role in UPI. All right, we can have a longer conversation on that afterwards. Okay. Um,
So, Matthew, the question that you asked is M-Pesa DPI. Now got me thinking. So, do you think it's possible for us to identify all the attributes of what we think is a DPI? There may be, we know some, but there may be a few more hidden ones that we are not aware of because we don't know a lot about all the systems. And then maybe one system can't really, have all those attributes. But if it's like X percentage coverage is there, then maybe the classification of something being a DPI can be done. Is that like one of the things for way forward?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, as I said, it's an evolving framework for how the team is thinking about it. They had to come up with a framework because I think what we've had up to this point is there's been a challenging language around what is DPI. In a way, because it's such a value um, loaded term, in a lot of the discussions has both globally and in different places has been down to the level where I think my digital system is really important, therefore it is digital public infrastructure. And I think to kind of guard against that and add some structure to it, not to say that a system is not important, but to add some lens and some framework for which how we can engage with that. Not saying that this has to be it, but this was an attempt to do that work. And so they said, okay, there are a couple of key aspects within the context of how DPI should work, how infrastructure, public infrastructure should work: interoperability and extensibility. There needs to be some transparency or accountability in the oversight process of the infrastructure. Um, Privacy and safety and security built into that process, inclusion and non-discrimination, and then obviously the scale of adoption in the context. And so these were some of the dimensions that they wrestled with and then came to a sense of a number of different indicators. And the indicators that they have in the projects are much broader than the ones that they ultimately then decided to say, okay, we'll use these as what we will say are must-haves. So there absolutely will be different models in the way that we think that energy is public infrastructure. Though in the case in many countries, it's produced by private producers. You know, the roads infrastructure that we have is not necessarily, in some cases, it's built by the government, but there are a lot of private entities that are ultimately doing the kind of the building of roads. But there's something above that we say that there needs to be some sort of public interest regulation of the capability. That yes, yes, and so trying to figure out then how do you quantify that in a way that you can observe it and then evaluate it across entities. And so that was the challenge of the team, and they've done a first pass. Them get a lot of different critique, but it's facilitated a very fascinating discussion around the topic. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. McNaughton. And yes, we are truly learning together. Digitization moves at the speed of trust. And a Jamaican term, now buy puss in a bag, which would not to buy a cat in a bag. You like to know what you're getting yourself into. Jamaican people were very skeptical for real. But with the right approaches, we'll learn and we'll adjust for a Jamaica that is technologically advanced.